Recently, I have decided to go back and play every game in the Uncharted series. About 20 minutes before beginning the script, I finished Uncharted 3, meaning that I have played the entire original trilogy of games released from 2007 to 2011. The two games in the trilogy that are most frequently compared are Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3, due to them being in the same original trilogy, and because Uncharted 1 is, well, Uncharted 1. In this video, I will be analyzing Uncharted 3 and discussing the similarities and differences between the second and third game. Let's get right into it, shall we? Throughout your 9-hour journey in Uncharted 3, there will be one constant: action. Action in the form of crashing cargo planes, collapsing ancient civilizations, and of course, everyone's favorite T-rated guns. Now, these T-rated guns are the catalyst of one of the core features present in Uncharted 3, and, well, a lot of games for that matter, combat. I'm definitely a person with some strong opinions on this topic, but I'm not trying to say that you're wrong if you enjoy the combat in Uncharted 3, I'm just saying that maybe you should try more games. Now, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into the actual reasoning behind my stated disapproval of the combat. To start, let's talk about the cover system, as that is pretty much your only defensive option in these games. The cover pretty much just works like it should, it blocks all of the bullets that hit it, and you even have a dedicated cover button, circle. You can also blind fire out of cover, a personal favorite technique of mine. It is pretty weird and janky to move out of cover and to move over a corner, but that's just good old PS3 controls at their best. The real issue begins with the game's method of taking you out of cover. Grenades, grenades, grenades. If the game feels like you have been in one cover for a little too long, it will just lob grenades at you like there's no tomorrow. There are even occasions where the game will throw 2 grenades at you at once. In these situations, there's only one option: switch cover. The problem is that as soon as you get up and begin running, you have already been shot about 32 times by every nearby enemy and his mother. This problem is exacerbated in arenas with minimal cover. Don't worry, however, Reggie realized his fault and came up with the perfect solution. But if you get more than one grenade thrown at you, just say goodbye to the wife and kids, because you are not coming back home, ever. The aforementioned solution is this little meter that pops up when you are close enough to a grenade. If you press the triangle during the marked window, you will throw the grenade right back at the enemy, except that your grenades will pretty much never hit that enemy, and if they hit anybody, it is a random innocent bystander or yourself. Sometimes the marked window is really far towards the bottom, and when this happens, the grenade will quite literally explode in your face. Now, all of this grenade business is pretty bad. However, there's an even more annoying little pest that loves to unfairly take Nate's life. This metaphorical pest is the enemies that either run behind Nate, spawn behind Nate, or enemies that are just on the sides. When these enemies come up, you will probably be guaranteed to die at least one time before you recognize who they are and end their life. This problem just frustrates me like no other because it basically ruins the entire flow of combat. If you get lucky and turn around to finish them off, by the time you return to facing forward, you will probably be greeted by either a couple of grenades or a shotgunner closing in on your position. It's just overall a lose-lose. And even worse is when there are multiple of the suckers. You see, when you die in a game, you want to feel as though it was a fair death and that the next time, if you return more experienced and tactful, you will prevail. But when a death from something like this comes up, you just get pissed. You don't feel like there's anything to really learn, you just have to return with better luck and knowledge of enemy positions. This is not the same as tactility and gameplay experience, because those things will apply to the entire rest of the game. The previously mentioned qualities of RNG and enemy positioning will only apply to a single shootout or segment of a game. Now for my next elephant-sized problem with this experience: the enemies themselves. It feels like every enemy in this game takes an entire magazine to kill, especially the armored enemies like the shotgunners and the LMG/minigun guys. These guys take an almost comical amount of bullets to be killed. At one point I decided to test it, and I found that a variant of the armored enemies takes something like 2.5 entire AK magazines to be killed. That is if you're hitting them in the body. If you hit them in the head, it only takes about 1.5 full AK magazines. I get that these guys are supposed to make the game more challenging and stuff, but I'm just saying that maybe 2.5 full magazines is a little excessive. I will say, however, that it is actually extremely satisfying to blow one of these guys into oblivion with a few grenades or other explosive weapons. The bullet sponge problem is made even worse by the weird little thing that the Naughty Dog decided to try with Uncharted 3 in particular. Every single enemy has infinite poise for absolutely no reason at all. What I mean when I say poise is that the enemies don't get stunned or even react to getting shot. They'll be running away or shooting, and you can shoot them in the head with absolutely no reaction on the enemy's end. This just makes combat feel extremely strange and different from any of the other games. Why did the developers decide this was a good idea? Beats me. Maybe they were going to add in a brand new stun system but just never got around to it and left us with this jank? Another big issue with the enemies is that in certain gunfights and sections of the game, there are way too many enemies. At times it almost starts to feel like a zombie apocalypse game, but replaced with stupid bulletproof poo-poo heads. On a side note, this is one of the only games that I have ever played that genuinely made me furious at the enemies. Most of the time when you get mad at a game, you are actually mad at the game and not really the enemies, but not in Uncharted 3. In this game, I would occasionally go out of my way to empty a magazine of bullets into a lifeless enemy if he really pissed me off. It also feels like you barely have any health even on the normal mode that I played on. I did this thinking that I would probably not die very much because of my experience playing the first two games, but no. I died many times, mostly due to the issues mentioned earlier, but also because of Nate's seemingly scrawny health. The severe punishment for popping out of cover for a mere second can be what feels like 2/3 of your health. This, coupled with annoying enemy placement, grenades, and bullet sponges, is a perfect recipe for a headache. Oh, and the stealth. Oh, the stealth. It's just bad. I'm sorry, but it really is. There is no crouch button, no stealthy weapons, basically no nothing. It is pretty obvious that the stealth is not the focus of these games. There's also really only one encounter in the whole game that requires you to use stealth, and that chapter just sucks anyway, so it's kind of like dropping a fresh turd on an already big heaping pile of brown seductive dung. I just have to go on one more little rant if I may, and that is about these weird little freaking suit enemies. They make me feel weird in a way that is just beyond a reasonable explanation. I just get a feeling of jank and weird Chinese bootlegness. It is probably a mixture of their models not being very detailed and me having seen them somewhere else in some weird mobile bootleg game that I tried out of pure boredom. Anyway, just had to get that out of the way real quick. All of these problems that I've discussed could have probably been minimized if the combat was not so freaking simple. It is literally just shoot guns, take cover, occasionally melee when the game forces you into it, and maybe sprinkle in a few grenades. That's it. Now I know that this is an old game and that these types of problems were not corrected nearly as much as they are today, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating. Look at other games from this era that had, in my opinion, far superior gameplay. Batman, Arkham Asylum and City, and Dark Souls. These games have much more satisfying and complex mechanics that make them more enjoyable to play in the modern era. To compare to something a little bit closer to home, we could take a look at the classic God of War games. These games honestly kind of fall into the same boat as the Uncharted series in my opinion, however, due to their simple combat structure. Maybe PlayStation just didn't have gameplay figured out at this time. As much as I may seem like a pessimistic prick in these videos, I actually do enjoy video games, and shooters like Uncharted just so happen to be some of my favorite games. Basically what I'm trying to get at is that I did actually enjoy these games despite all of the slander, and I recognize that Uncharted 3 actually improved on the series' combat in a couple of key ways. Firstly, the melee is drastically improved over any of the previous games. Namely, you can actually defend yourself effectively in melee with the triangle button. This makes the melee sequences feel much more polished, and they can actually be quite fun due to all of the unique animations that Nate can perform. I actually really enjoyed cleaning out an entire bar next to our old friend Sully, who's a freaking slugger for absolutely no reason. I swear, if we weren't there, Sully would have killed everybody in that entire bar with his bare hands. Oh yeah, it's also really satisfying to beat down a big man David style. Naughty Dog has also realized the fault of their ways in previous Uncharted games, as they let you use many different weapons throughout this game. Sure, a lot of guns return, but it's still fun to have so many options available in most fights. My personal favorite weapon new to Uncharted 3 is the double barrel shotgun. It just destroys everything in its firing path. It also helps that I'm a sucker for double barrel shotguns in any game after playing Doom Eternal. Like, come on, how can you not feel the pure power emanating from this finely engineered piece of metal and wood? Climbing is another central part of the Nathan Drake collection. The climbing in these games is pretty standard for the PS3, you just press X to jump around and use the analog stick to point Nate in the right direction. I actually quite enjoy some of the climbing sections in these games because Naughty Dog love to give us beautiful scenery and epic displays to gawk at while climbing. It's so nostalgic to me when you're climbing or just in a certain area and the camera zooms out to display the whole picture. Uncharted really does a good job at this. For example, in one of the boat chapters there's this scene. The flags moving on the boat platforms really make the scene look so much nicer with the added movement. You get a sense of the scale and stature of this ruined sea vessel. Another pro of Uncharted 3 in particular is that it never gives you so much climbing or shooting that you start to get tired of it. The game knows when to switch it up, and I really appreciate that. It honestly made Uncharted 3 feel the freshest out of all three games in my opinion. Uncharted 2 loves to give you fighting sections on top of fighting sections, and Uncharted 1 as well, Uncharted 1. Now time for the main event, the story of Uncharted 3. To start with, I would just like to address all of the things that the game just doesn't tell us for some odd reason. I don't necessarily believe that unexplained things in stories make them weaker, however, I do think that there are some things that need to be explained in order to make a world feel believable and interesting. Firstly, we don't learn what happened after Uncharted 2 between Nate and Elena. This just seems like it is now a thing that these games like to do for some reason, but overall, I guess that this doesn't really make the story much weaker or less effective. It just makes the story feel a little bit less believable now because of how Nate continuously falls into Elena's arms by complete coincidence. Now for the real reason that I brought up this topic. We don't learn anything about the main antagonists, Marlowe and Talbot. Sure, we know that they're part of a Queen Elizabeth secret society thing, and that Sully used to work for Marlowe at some point, but other than that, they're just kind of bad guys used to push forward the plot. It just all kind of feels like lazy writing that could have used a little bit more time in the oven. Overall, this just makes the story a little less interesting due to the lack of a good villain. However, you could argue that Uncharted has never been focused on its villains. The story seemed to be more focused on Nate, his friends, history, and globetrotting adventure. Another new character, Charlie Cutter, is never given a backstory or actually just any information for that matter. All that we know is he is good friends with Nate, Sully, and Chloe. He has probably also met Elena because of this reaction from her hearing his name.
He's got Cutter's notebook.
What? Wait, what? Charlie Cutter?
No time.
This overall definitely weakens the story, as one of the main focuses of Uncharted is the friends made along the way. The story would have been made so much better if we had been given at least some development for Charlie. Same goes for Chloe, who we have had 2 games with by this point. Fun fact, Charlie is played by the same actor who played Zoran Lazarevich in the last game. That honestly just kind of weirds me out, man. But he does a really good job at both, so kudos to him. I also just want to quickly mention how much of an absolute Chad Charlie is. He literally gets hit with a mind control dart and he's just too freaking tanky to completely submit to it. Sure, he turns on Nate and friends for a little bit, but he quickly corrects. Oh yeah, and he can beat Nate in a fist fight. That alone is reason enough for Naughty Dog to have given this man some backstory. The main fault of Uncharted 3's story is just how forgettable it is in my opinion. Nate just has to find some treasure as always and discovers a big scheme that he has to foil in order to save humanity. That's pretty much all of these games in a nutshell. Yes, I understand that it makes for a good Indiana Jones style story to accompany all of the action and adventure, but I just can't help but feel amazed that these games were made by the same people who made The Last of Us, a story that has stuck with me for life and still inspires me to this day. There's likely only one thing that I will remember Uncharted 3 by, and that is my next point. One thing that really stood out to me in Uncharted 3 is Sully and Nate's backstory that we learn about early in the game. I'm extremely glad to have finally gotten some explanation for how this old adventurer Chad came to meet this much younger adventurer Chad. We actually get a pretty nice little flashback sequence that tells us a lot about what Nate was like in his younger years, and we get to see the ladies' man himself in the prime of his life. How did Nate get all the way to Colombia though? He must have some real dark connections to the underworld or something. Cartel maybe? Or he just stole a boat GTA style and snuck his way into the country? I don't know. Never underestimate kids in Naughty Dog games. They seem to be just as dangerous as the adults for some reason. The story in Uncharted 3 is actually much simpler than its predecessors, and is therefore very easy and simple to follow. In this game I was actually able to tell you the reason I was in a Syrian fortress, or why I was at an ancient city in the desert. This simplicity also makes the story a bit less of a slog to get through. I never got exhausted from any story reason like I did sometimes in Uncharted 2. Sully is as good and suspicious as he was in the previous games. He gets a lot more screen time in this game compared to the last one, and I really appreciate that. I was pretty disappointed in the last game when he was really only used in one mission. He is one of mine and obviously a lot of people's favorite characters. This game is also filled with a bunch of classic Uncharted set pieces that really give these games their trademark charm. Along with this, we get to visit a multitude of interesting countries and locations such as Syria, Yemen, France, and Colombia. Another thing that I would like to touch on in this video is replayability. Uncharted 3 must have actually been pretty replayable back in the day. That is, if you could stomach the gameplay. There are multiple difficulty settings, along with an extensive list of extras that can be accessed in the pause menu. After all, who can resist some Donut Drake action? I assume that these extras were also present in the original game, but there is a chance that I am wrong and that these are only in the Blue Point trilogy. The treasures are also there, but they're not really worth finding unless you're a trophy hunter. Now, I'm going to be comparing Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3 to see which one is really the best in the Nathan Drake collection, starting with the gameplay. Both of these games obviously have the same core gameplay, but I believe that there are some interesting gameplay differences to talk about here. Firstly, Uncharted 2 has numerous, much bigger and better arenas with more cover that allow for more freedom and create more interesting gameplay opportunities. Of course, there are also many large-scale shootouts in Uncharted 3, however, I feel that these are much more sparse. Uncharted 3 also has the advantage of weapon variety, which was severely lacking in the previous games, and there are a good amount of new weapons to keep everything fresh. The AK-47 in Uncharted 2 was extremely overused in my opinion. It felt like 80% of the enemies in the game used it. Obviously that means that the gun was used most by the player as well. The enemies in Uncharted 3 seem to be more varied and actually carry things other than assault rifles. Another positive of Uncharted 3 is that you can throw back grenades. It is an awesome way of blending offense and defense into one fluid movement. It is actually pretty hard to believe that the earlier Uncharted games never even thought of adding this. The obvious downside to this mechanic is when you get hit by your own grenade. Everything other than the first point sounds pretty good so far for Uncharted 3. That is, until you remember the biggest issue of them all: stagger. Nobody in Uncharted 3 staggers other than a couple of outliers. It just baffles me honestly. There is no reason that the developers should not have noticed this. It just ends up making the gameplay feel really clunky. There are few times in Uncharted when you get as frustrated as when you're killed by an enemy in Uncharted 3 that should have been staggered. For this reason alone, I'm gonna have to give Uncharted 2 the victory in this aspect. Now time for the story. Although neither of these games have exceptional plots, I would say that the plot in Uncharted 2 is just slightly better. This is due to it having more drive and more actually happening. Uncharted 3 is less driven and nothing really happens. We can assume that the British government would have been able to do some pretty evil stuff with the vessel, but I don't think that they're really that bad. As for Uncharted 2, we pretty much know everything we need to know from this line.
Genghis Khan, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, they were all great men.
For these reasons, I'm gonna have to say that Uncharted 2 has the better plot. Naughty Dog games are obviously all about characters, and these two games are full of them. Good ones? Other than Sully, none of the characters are super interesting in my opinion. Sully is an old mentor with a good sense of humor and a heart of gold. Nate can be funny too, and also has a heart of gold, but he is more interesting for the crazy adventures that he gets into and his incredible feats. Chloe is not very funny or interesting in my opinion. It really just seems like she was a romantic interest in Uncharted 2 that returns to Uncharted 3 just to be there. Elena is a pretty strange character. She continuously leaves and then rehashes her relationship with Nate due to how she just seemingly can't let go of him. She is as foolish as she is courageous and adventurous. Charlie is another pretty interesting character due to the juxtaposition of his appearance and his personality. He looks like a hardened criminal at first, but it is quickly revealed that he is actually a good-natured intellectual. Some of these characters are pretty solid, but the weakness is definitely the villains. The villains in both of these games are pretty much just there to oppose the main character and give them something to do. The only villain that was given a little bit of love is Flynn. We get to see him a lot, and we get a pretty good amount of dialogue for him. Despite this, he still isn't super interesting in my opinion. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually think that Uncharted 3 just barely beats out Uncharted 2 in the character department. We get to explore with Elena, Sully, and Charlie. Uncharted 2 barely has Sully, and we get a good amount of Elena. Tenzin is pretty cool, but he only appears in one segment of the game. I literally forgot that Schaefer existed. In summary, Uncharted 2 is more ambitious with better combat and a better plot, while Uncharted 3 is smaller with questionable combat, being redeemed only by its characters that are superior to that of Uncharted 2's. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, then a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. My last video is my most viewed thing that I have ever made in my entire life, and I really appreciate everybody that watched it. Hopefully we can do the same thing with this one. Until then, I will see you guys on the flip side.